Welcome to The Explainer. We live in a world that absolutely glorifies the grind, right? We're constantly told to push harder, work longer, sacrifice sleep, all at the altar of success. But today, we're unpacking a story that's going to fundamentally change how you view productivity, ambition, and the very real physical limits of the human body. We're looking at the deeply personal and honestly terrifying cost of extreme productivity. It's a journey from unchecked ambition to sudden paralysis, and it carries a massive warning for absolutely anyone who's ever compromised their health for goal.
So I want you to ask yourself right now, what's your criteria for success? For the subject of today's explainer, a 22-year-old university student, the answer to that question literally became a matter of life and death. Now, he describes himself as someone who struggled with serious procrastination throughout his teens. He felt totally stuck in his comfort zone, just kind of waiting for the perfect moment. He actually compared himself to a plant waiting for a stimulus rather than taking action. He knew he was procrastinating, but it was like a patient who knows the name of their pain but just learns to ignore it. But entering his third year of university, he decided he'd had enough. He was going to manufacture his own success.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The Ultimate Success Checklist. This is where his whole mindset shifts from passive procrastination to just extreme ambition. He decided he was going to lock in, setting this really rigid deadline of 30 years old to hit a specific set of goals. And he believed if he didn't hit every single one, he was a total failure. First up, a Spider-Man body. So despite having pretty bad gym anxiety, he signs up at 23. And he doesn't just go casually, he commits to a grueling push-pull legs routine for 6 straight months, 0 days off during the week. By month 1, he's already benching 20 kilos. But along with that physical transformation, he demanded a GPA he could actually be proud of, a decent income, and an active investment portfolio, all before turning 30. I mean, think about that. That is an incredibly taxing workload to just suddenly dump on yourself all at once.
Moving on to Section 2, grinding through the night.
So to get that decent income and fund that portfolio, he ended up forcing himself into a completely unnatural lifestyle. He basically became a creature of the night. Now that number 10, it's crucial. It represents the 10 hours of load shedding, scheduled power outages, enforced by Karachi's electricity provider. Because he literally couldn't work during the day without power, he stayed awake waiting for midnight when the electricity finally kicked back on. He was running a video editing business, which actually started out as a hobby making anime music videos, but it turned into a paying gig. So working from midnight until 6 a.m. just made sense to him. No interruptions, the city's asleep. He even convinced himself he was sort of extending his life, getting more hours out of the day. But to pull this off, he was budgeting his sleep the way most of us budget groceries.
And this brilliantly illustrates the terrifying biological formula he was unknowingly following. This wasn't just a tough schedule. It was quite literally a recipe for a medical catastrophe. Step 1, the heavy lifting. He never brought a water bottle to the gym. He said his brain just didn't think to do it. Now, heavy lifting naturally spikes your blood pressure, but doing it while dehydrated actually thickens your blood. Step 2, sleep deprivation. His reverse circadian rhythm from working those night shifts severely messed up his sleep. And then Step 3, that lack of sleep spikes cortisol, your stress hormone, which raises blood pressure even further. But he didn't connect the dots, because outwardly, he felt fine. He was getting fit, he was making money.
There's this really tragic juxtaposition here between his psychological perception and his biological reality. In his mind, he was just in the grinding phase. Sure, he had massive dark circles under his eyes, but he figured, hey, everyone has a grinding phase, right? It's just an uphill climb to success. But the harsh biological reality was a volcano getting ready to erupt. Dehydration thickening the blood, plus sleep deprivation driving up cortisol and blood pressure. As he wrote later looking back on it, if you do both for long enough, you're not grinding. You're building a blood clot.
Which brings us to Section 3, anatomy of a stroke.
The really crucial point here is that your body keeps an absolute, unforgiving ledger of everything you do to it. Let's look at the terrifying climax of all these choices, which happened on February 12th. Pay close attention to this timeline because it just shows how easily we can dismiss massive warning signs when we're obsessively focused on productivity. So in the afternoon, while hanging out at the library, his lips slurred, and he actually knew this was a stroke symptom, but a sudden wave of dizziness hit him and he convinced himself it was just general weakness. Totally ignored it. He then went on to give a full presentation to a lecture room in that exact condition. He goes home, takes a simple paracetamol, and goes to sleep. Sometime in the night, he wakes up and notices his hand isn't moving. Instead of panicking, he just assumes he slept on it funny. He goes right back to sleep, totally unaware that his brain was literally suffocating.
When he finally woke up the next afternoon, the reality was just brutal. He tried to get up, fell straight out of bed, realized he couldn't move properly, and actually lost control of his bladder. His neighbors heard the noise, rushed in, and immediately took him to the hospital. But here's the wildest part. On the way to the hospital, during this catastrophic medical emergency, his brain was still stuck on the grind. He's literally in transit, thinking about a video game he's developing, some coding project he had lined up, and figuring out how to ask out a girl at uni. It wasn't until he was lying in the hospital bed, thinking, wow, this sucks, and suddenly vomiting green ooze, that the sheer severity of it truly hit him.
So let's break down the cold, hard medical science of exactly what happened. The diagnosis was an ischemic stroke. You can think of it like a clogged pipe in the brain. All that heavy lifting without water, the thickened blood, the spiked cortisol from almost no sleep, it all combined to form a clot that choked off his brain's blood supply. This caused permanent damage to the basal ganglia, which is the specific part of your brain that handles voluntary motor control. And because the damage happened on the right side of his brain, it resulted in hemiplegia, which means complete paralysis on the left side of his body. At 22 years old, just because he wanted to lock in, he was now paralyzed.
Section 4. The paralyzing reality.
The medical event itself is terrifying, obviously, but the agonizingly slow reality of recovery is where the true cost of this extreme hustle culture really sets in. He spent 2 full months strictly on bed rest. 2 months of just staring at his phone, reading books, looking at the ceiling. And honestly, the most heartbreaking part is that he got no formal rehab. His family just couldn't afford it. Instead, he had to rely entirely on his brother, who helped him exercise at home using nothing but the basic knowledge he'd picked up from his own gym routines. He describes those days as passing so incredibly slowly, yet feeling like sand blowing away in the wind once they were gone. By the end of that first month lying there paralyzed, his mental health inevitably just fractures. He suffered a severe, localized panic attack and became absolutely convinced he was dying. So the very next day, he writes these heartfelt final goodbye letters to all his friends and family. He uses an app to schedule them to send exactly 1 year into the future. But in a moment of incredibly dark, tragic irony, the timer glitched. Every single goodbye letter was sent out instantly to everyone he knew. As he dryly points out in his story, that was a very fun situation to try and explain from a hospital bed.
And that brings us to Section 5, Why the Rooster Screams.
It's during this prolonged period of forced stillness that we really reach the thematic conclusion of this whole explainer. Lying in that bed, unable to move his left side, not even wanting to scream because he didn't want to scare his mom in the next room, he has this profound realization. Remember that neighborhood rooster? The one that screamed at 3 a.m. every single night while he was grinding away at his desk? He used to think of it as just company in the dark. But paralyzed in his bed, staying totally quiet while everything inside his body was wrong, he finally understood that rooster. It doesn't scream because anyone is listening. It doesn't have some grand master plan. It screams because something inside of it has to object, because the alternative is just lying still in the unnatural dark and pretending morning isn't happening. He realized his body had filed its own violent objection to his unnatural lifestyle. That 3 a.m. rooster wasn't background noise. It was the only honest thing in the room, protesting the dark.
By May, which was actually his birth month, the absolute decimation of his initial goals was complete. Those Spider-Man muscles he spent 6 relentless months building, completely gone soft from bed rest. The decent income he worked through the night to earn, gone. And that ultimate success checklist he was willing to sacrifice his biology for, it was buried somewhere under a massive hospital bill. It's the ultimate paradox, really. Ignoring your physical health to chase success is going to eventually destroy the exact foundation you need to achieve that success in the first place.
We've seen exactly what happens when someone ignores their absolute limits just to chase a checklist. He treated his body like a machine, right up until the engine literally blew. So I'm going to leave you with this to think about. Look at your own schedule. Look at your ambitions and your physical habits. What warning signs are you currently ignoring in your own dark? What is your screaming rooster?